The schoolteacher was too proud to starve, so she gripped his belt and said, "Make me feel worthy." Amina was known in her small town as a woman of great strength and quiet dignity. She was a schoolteacher, one of the few in the village who truly cared about her students. Every morning she walked the dusty streets to the small schoolhouse, carrying her worn satchel filled with books, papers, and her own determination. She never asked for praise, but the children loved her. They followed her every word, listened to her stories, and felt safe in her classroom. To Amina, teaching was more than a job, it was her life. Her small apartment was simple and neat, but it was full of reminders of her purpose. On the walls, colorful drawings from her students were pinned with care. On the table, neatly stacked books waited for her lesson plans. Every corner of the room spoke of order, patience, and quiet pride. Life, however, had started to change. The school where Amina had worked for over 10 years suddenly announced a pause in operations. There was no warning, no reassurance, just the news that funds had run dry. Teachers would not be paid, and the school would remain closed until further notice. Amina felt a cold knot of worry form in her stomach. She had never needed charity before, never asked anyone for help. She had always managed, even on a small salary, but now the future seemed uncertain. Her mind raced as she counted the coins left in her small purse. They would last for a week, maybe 2. After that, she did not know. She tried to continue her routine, waking up early and preparing lessons in her mind. Even though the school was closed, she could not stop thinking about her students. She imagined their eyes, eager and trusting, and a deep sadness gripped her heart. She wanted to be there for them, even if the walls of the classroom were empty. But she could not ignore the hunger that had begun to creep in quietly, like an uninvited guest. At first, it was just a dull ache, something she could ignore. She told herself she could eat later, that she would find a way. But as the days passed, the ache grew sharper, harder to dismiss. Amina's pride was strong. She refused to go to neighbors for help. She refused to ask her relatives, even those who lived not far away. In her mind, admitting need was the same as admitting failure. She had always been self-reliant, and she was determined to continue that way. Every morning, she would open her cupboards, searching for food, hoping that a forgotten piece of bread or a few dried beans had been left behind. She learned to ration carefully, eating the smallest portions, just enough to keep her energy going. Some nights she lay awake, listening to the quiet hum of the town, her stomach empty, thinking about the lessons she would give once the school reopened. Even though hunger gnawed at her, Amina found small ways to distract herself. She took walks through the town, greeting familiar faces, exchanging polite words. She watched children play in the dusty streets, their laughter like a bittersweet melody in her ears. She stopped by the small market pretending to window shop, imagining she could buy food, even though she had no money. She noticed the aroma of fresh bread, the glint of vegetables in the sun, and a sharp pang of longing ran through her. Hunger was no longer just a physical sensation. It had become a quiet, constant companion that followed her every step. At night, her thoughts were her harshest companions. Amina replayed memories of her past, remembering days when she had enough, when she had been proud of her small accomplishments. She remembered teaching her first class, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the thrill of knowing she could make a difference. She remembered the parents thanking her for her dedication, and the proud smiles of her students. All of that felt distant now, overshadowed by the uncertainty of tomorrow. She felt isolated in her struggle, as if no one truly understood the tension between her pride and her need. Yet, even in these difficult days, Amina held tightly to her dignity. She refused to beg or show desperation to anyone. She made sure her neighbors only saw a woman who was calm and composed. If someone asked how she was, she would smile softly and say she was fine, even when her stomach was empty. Her pride became both a shield and a burden. It protected her from humiliation, but it also kept her from seeking help that could make her life a little easier. Amina understood, with quiet clarity, that her pride was part of who she was. She could not let go of it, no matter how hungry or tired she became. To cope, she began writing small letters in her notebook. These letters were not meant to be sent. They were private thoughts, a way to release her worries and fears. She wrote about the school, about her students, about her hunger, and about the strange mixture of fear and hope she felt every day. Writing became a small comfort, a way to keep her mind busy while her body struggled. She would read her words aloud to herself in the empty room, imagining someone was listening, someone understood her. These moments were a quiet rebellion against the loneliness that threatened to overwhelm her. One afternoon, she walked to the edge of town, to the small river where children sometimes played. She sat on a rock and let the sun warm her face. The water sparkled and birds sang in the trees. For a brief moment, she felt a sense of peace. But the hunger in her belly reminded her that peace was temporary. She realized that she had to find a way to survive without losing herself. She could not allow her pride to collapse completely, nor could she ignore the needs of her body. She was trapped in a delicate balance, walking a line between endurance and desperation. Despite the growing tension inside her, Amina never stopped caring about others. She continued to think about her students and their families. She imagined their faces, wondering if they were struggling as much as she was. She wished she could teach them again, and she longed for the sound of laughter and learning in the classroom. Her own hunger became a quiet motivation. She wanted to survive not just for herself, but for the children who depended on her. The thought gave her strength, even when everything else seemed uncertain. As the first week passed without income, the reality of her situation settled in. The cupboards were nearly empty, the coins had disappeared, and her stomach ached constantly. She considered taking small jobs, offering tutoring lessons to neighborhood children, but she worried it might affect her pride. Each option she weighed seemed to demand a compromise she was not ready to make. Hunger became a teacher in its own way, showing her limits and testing her resolve. Every night she lay awake, listening to the quiet town. She imagined a life where she could not only survive, but thrive. She pictured herself teaching again, her students eager to learn, her classroom full of light and hope. These thoughts kept her from despair. She repeated them like a mantra. I will survive. I will not lose my dignity. I will find a way. Even as hunger made her weak, her mind stayed sharp, searching for solutions, hoping for an opportunity. The days continued slowly, each one blending into the next. Amina's pride and perseverance became a quiet story in itself. To anyone observing, she appeared calm, orderly, and strong. Yet inside she was a whirlwind of fear, determination, and hope. She was a woman who refused to be defeated by circumstances, a woman who would fight quietly, without complaint, until she could stand on her own feet again. Hunger had entered her life, but it had not taken her spirit, and so each day Amina continued her routine. She walked the streets, she thought of her students, she wrote in her notebook, and she rationed the small scraps of food she had left. She dreamed of the day the school would reopen, of the laughter of children filling the air again, of the pride of being useful and respected. She carried herself with dignity, even as hunger pulled at her body. She was proud, stubborn, and quietly heroic, a woman determined to survive on her own terms. Even in silence, She spoke loudly. Her story had already begun, not with wealth or comfort, but with courage, pride, and the refusal to surrender her dignity to circumstances. Every step she took through the town, every thoughtful glance, every careful ration of food, told the world that Amina was not broken. She was simply waiting for the moment when her strength, patience, and pride would guide her to a new beginning. And deep down, she knew that moment would come, even if it was still far away. Amina's life had taken a hard turn, but she refused to let it define her. Each morning she woke up early, her body still weak from hunger, yet her mind remained sharp. She continued her small routines, cleaning her tiny apartment, tidying her old books, and planning lessons in her head for the students she could no longer see. She imagined their bright eyes and eager faces, and a strange mixture of hope and sorrow filled her chest. The memory of their smiles became both her comfort and her burden, reminding her of what she had lost and what she still had to fight for. Food was becoming scarce. Her cupboards were nearly empty, and even her coins had disappeared. She had learned to eat the smallest portions possible, often chewing slowly and savoring each bite as if it were a treasure. Some days she managed a single piece of bread or a small bowl of rice. Other days she went without anything at all, telling herself that her pride and perseverance were stronger than hunger. Yet each pang in her stomach reminded her of reality, and she could not ignore it forever. Despite the hunger, Amina avoided asking for help. She passed neighbors on the streets and smiled politely, speaking as if nothing had changed. To the outside world, she appeared calm, composed, and in control. No one suspected the struggle that weighed heavily on her each day. Inside, though, she felt isolated, as if the town itself had forgotten her existence. She thought about friends and relatives who might offer support, but her pride held her back. Asking for help, in her mind, would be admitting failure, and she could not allow herself that. The mornings were the hardest. Hunger made her stomach ache, her head light and dizzy. Yet she forced herself to walk to the small market in town, pretending to window shop. She would linger near the bakery, inhaling the scent of fresh bread, and imagine taking it home. The smell tormented her, but it also reminded her that life continued, even when she felt empty inside. She watched families buying food, mothers carrying bags filled with fruits and vegetables, and children laughing as they ran down the streets. Amina longed to join them, to feel the simple comfort of nourishment, yet she remained distant, holding tightly to her pride. She began to notice how small gestures of kindness could bring unexpected warmth. The shopkeeper at the corner would often nod at her, offering a smile without needing anything in return. Ah! Amina smiled back, though her heart ached at the contrast between her life and those around her. Even a small gesture of friendliness felt like a reminder that she was still part of the world, that she had value beyond her circumstances. These moments became tiny anchors of hope, helping her to continue when the nights were hardest. Nights were the loneliest. When the town fell silent, Amina lay on her thin mattress staring at the ceiling. Hunger gnawed relentlessly, making sleep a distant dream. She would close her eyes and imagine the classroom again, hearing the excited voices of children answering questions and laughing at small jokes. She pictured herself standing in front of the blackboard, chalk in hand, her heart filled with pride. These memories were bittersweet. They reminded her of what she had, but also of what she had lost. Some nights she allowed herself to cry quietly, letting the tears fall without judgment, releasing some of the tension that had built up inside her. Despite her struggle, Amina remained resourceful. She started small projects to help herself survive. She offered tutoring to children in her neighborhood, quietly asking families if they could pay her in small amounts of food or coins. Some families welcomed her help eagerly, others hesitated. She taught with the same patience and care as before, hiding the growing weakness in her body behind a calm smile. These lessons became more than a way to survive. They were reminders that her purpose was still alive, that she could still contribute, even in her hardship.
Amina began to notice the little things that signaled the town's indifference or subtle judgment.
People would talk quietly, unaware that she could hear, whispering about the teacher who had lost everything. She ignored these comments outwardly, but inside, they cut deeply. Hunger was one thing, pride was another, and the whispers made her wonder if she was truly invisible. Still, she refused to let them see her bow. She reminded herself that strength was not always loud, and dignity was not always recognized. Her self-worth had to come from within, not from the opinions of others. Her landlord, Rashid, had begun noticing the changes in her life. He saw the unpaid rent piling up, the small trips she made to the market, and the way she seemed to carry herself more carefully, as if every action was measured. He was not cruel, but he was practical. He had responsibilities, and he did not fully understand the struggle Amina was enduring. Some days he would drop by her apartment, asking politely if she could pay her rent, and she would nod and smile, promising that she would. Inside, her stomach tightened with fear, yet she did not reveal her desperation. Pride had taught her to endure silently. Amina's body began sending warning signals. Weakness, dizziness, and constant hunger made even simple tasks difficult. Yet, her mind stayed sharp. She observed, she planned, and she endured. She learned how to stretch her food, how to survive longer without eating, and how to mask the physical effects from the world. Hunger became a teacher, forcing her to adapt, forcing her to find small victories in each day. Each moment she survived felt like proof of her strength. She began to notice how hunger changed the way she perceived life. Small things, like the warmth of sunlight on her face or the sound of a bird singing, became sources of comfort. She learned to find joy in simplicity, drinking water slowly, feeling the cool breeze on her skin, savoring a single piece of bread as if it were a feast. These moments reminded her that life was still beautiful, even in hardship, and that survival required more than just food. It required hope, focus, and perseverance. One day, while walking through the town square, she saw children laughing and sharing bread from their lunchboxes. She felt a pang of envy, but also a spark of determination. She realized that she wanted to survive, not only for herself, but so she could return to teaching and helping children like them. Hunger had made her strong in unexpected ways. It had taught her patience, resilience, and the importance of holding on to dignity, even when the world seemed indifferent. As the days passed, Amina began to consider new ways to improve her situation. She thought about asking for temporary work, sewing clothes, cleaning homes, or helping in small shops. Each option brought anxiety because it meant admitting she needed help, yet she also understood that survival sometimes required compromise. Her pride, once absolute, became balanced by practicality. She would not beg, but she could work, and that was still her choice. Through it all, she continued to teach in her mind. She created imaginary lessons for children, writing them in her small notebook, planning exercises and stories. These imaginary lessons kept her spirit alive and reminded her of her identity. She was a teacher, a woman of dignity, and she refused to allow hunger or circumstance to erase that. Her pride and purpose became intertwined, giving her the strength to endure day by day, even as hunger continued to pull at her body. Amina's struggle was not easy. Each day was a battle between her pride and her physical needs. between fear and determination. Yet, she remained steadfast. She continued to walk the streets with her head held high, to offer tutoring quietly, to find joy in small things, and to keep her inner dignity intact. Hunger had entered her life, but it had not defeated her spirit. She was learning, slowly but surely, how to survive without losing herself. And so, as the sun set each evening and she returned to her small apartment, she prepared for another night. She had learned to endure, to find small comforts, and to balance pride with survival. Each day she moved forward with quiet courage, knowing that one day her perseverance would lead her to a brighter chapter. The struggle was harsh, but it was also shaping her into someone stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Hunger had entered her life, but it could never take her dignity. Amina's days had begun to blend together, each one heavier than the last. The hunger in her stomach had grown sharper, a constant reminder that survival was no longer simple. She woke every morning with a dull ache that stretched through her entire body. Her once bright energy had been replaced with fatigue, but her mind refused to give in. She knew that she had to stay strong. Giving up, even for a moment, felt impossible. She had built her identity around dignity and pride, and no circumstance, no matter how desperate, could take that away. She told herself this over and over. Despite her growing weakness, she continued to go through her routines. She tidied her apartment, cleaned the small blackboard she kept for her students, and wrote imaginary lessons in her notebook. She imagined herself teaching the children again, their faces filled with curiosity and laughter. These thoughts gave her temporary comfort, a fragile shield against the loneliness and hunger that threatened to overwhelm her. Yet she could not ignore the reality that she was slowly running out of options. Each day felt like walking a tightrope. One wrong step, one miscalculation, and everything she had fought for could collapse. One evening, after walking through the town and pretending to browse at the market, she returned to her small apartment to find her landlord, Rashid, waiting. His face was calm but firm. He had come to ask about her rent, which had now been overdue for weeks. Amina's stomach tightened and her heart raced. She had no money, no plan, no way to pay him. Yet she refused to show panic. She smiled politely, greeting him as she always did, though her hands shook slightly. Rashid cleared his throat and asked again about the rent, and Amina could feel the pressure building. She wanted to speak honestly, to explain her struggle, but her pride had always stopped her. For hours, she and Rashid sat across from each other in her tiny living room. The air between them was thick with tension, unspoken words, and the weight of circumstances neither of them fully controlled. Amina's stomach rumbled, a sharp, almost painful reminder of how weak she had become. She tried to ignore it, focusing on Rashid's words, on his calm, questioning gaze. But inside, a storm was building. She was exhausted, hungry, and proud, yet she realized that her survival depended on acknowledging the truth she had avoided for so long. The realization hit her with sudden clarity. Pride had kept her alive, yes, but it had also trapped her in suffering. She understood that asking for help did not mean surrendering her dignity. It meant choosing life over stubbornness. Her eyes met Rashid's, and she took a deep, steadying breath. She began to speak, not begging, not pleading, but speaking honestly and calmly. She explained the situation: the school closure, the lack of income, her small attempts to survive, and her struggle to maintain her pride while also keeping herself alive. Rashid listened quietly. For the first time, Amina felt that someone truly understood her, or at least tried to. The silence that followed her words was long and heavy, yet it was not oppressive. It was reflective, filled with unspoken thoughts and mutual recognition. Amina could feel the tension in her body, the hunger, the fatigue, and the fear, but she held herself upright. She refused to crumble under the weight of shame or embarrassment. Instead, she showed strength in her vulnerability, a quiet courage that had defined her life but had never been tested like this before. In that moment, a subtle shift occurred. Amina realized that her pride was not a barrier, but a tool. It had allowed her to endure, to maintain her dignity, even in desperate circumstances. Yet now, she saw that pride alone could not feed her. She had to combine it with honesty and courage. She could not hide behind silence anymore. The conversation with Rashid became more than a discussion about money. It became a reflection of her values, her identity, and her refusal to lose herself, even in the darkest times. Hunger was still there, gnawing and persistent. But Amina's mind felt clearer. She realized that true strength was not about enduring alone. It was about recognizing when support was necessary and accepting it without shame. Rashid, moved by her honesty and the dignity in her words, offered a solution. Not charity, not handouts, but a way to survive with respect. He suggested small work opportunities in his shop and allowed her time to repay the rent gradually. Amina's stomach clenched at the offer, not because of doubt, but because it was a relief she had never imagined allowing herself. That night, as Amina prepared a small meal from the little she had, she reflected on the day. She realized that the most difficult moments often brought the deepest lessons. Hunger had pushed her to the edge, but it had also shown her the importance of courage, honesty, and adaptability. She understood that survival was not a measure of wealth or resources alone. It was a combination of persistence, intelligence, and the ability to accept help when needed. For the first time in weeks, she felt a quiet sense of hope. Yet the journey was not over. Hunger had not disappeared, and the road ahead remained uncertain. Each step required careful thought, planning, and patience. Amina began to strategize, thinking about how she could make the most of Rashid's offer while continuing to maintain her pride and independence. She considered offering tutoring again, helping neighbors with chores, and finding creative ways to earn food or money. Every idea she formed became a small victory, a reminder that she was still capable of controlling her life despite the circumstances. In the following days, Amina started to put her plans into action. She rose early each morning, preparing for small jobs and tutoring sessions. Though her body ached and hunger made her movements slow, her mind remained sharp. She discovered that resilience was not only physical but mental. Each interaction, each small task completed, reinforced her sense of purpose. She felt that she was reclaiming control over her life, even in the face of adversity. Amina also began to observe the subtle ways in which people could impact her world. The children she tutored showed remarkable respect, listening intently and showing appreciation in small gestures, a smile, a note, or a shy "thank you." These moments reminded her of the value of human connection and reinforced the idea that dignity was not only preserved in isolation, but also in relationships built on respect and mutual support. She felt strengthened by these connections, gaining renewed confidence in herself. Hunger remained a constant companion, but it was no longer the master of her life. Amina learned to pace herself, to find small sources of nourishment, and to balance her physical needs with her emotional and mental strength. She became more attuned to her body, listening carefully to signals of weakness while still maintaining focus on her goals. Every day became a lesson in patience, perseverance, and adaptability. She was learning to survive intelligently, not just stubbornly. One afternoon, after a long day of tutoring and small errands, she returned home exhausted but proud. She reflected on the journey so far, realizing that the darkest moments often led to the most significant growth. Her pride had not been a hindrance but a guide, helping her navigate challenges with dignity. Hunger had been a harsh teacher, but it had forced her to adapt, plan, and value herself in ways she had never understood before. She felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, knowing that she had faced her lowest point without losing her identity. That night, as she lay on her mattress and looked at the ceiling, she felt something shift within her. The despair that had once seemed overwhelming now felt more like a challenge, something to be met with courage, strategy, and resilience. She realized that she had survived not because she had avoided difficulty, but because she had faced it head-on, with honesty, humility, and strength. She closed her eyes, imagining the classroom again, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Her journey was far from over, but she knew that she had passed a turning point, and that knowledge gave her a sense of peace she had not felt in weeks. In the following days, Amina continued to implement her small plan. She worked quietly, earning food in small payments, building stability slowly. Each day reinforced her belief that survival was not only about strength but also about courage, wisdom, and the ability to accept help without losing self-respect. Her pride remained intact, but it had transformed from stubborn isolation to dignified resilience. She felt a quiet optimism growing, the kind that could not be shaken by hunger or hardship alone. Amina's story in these days became a testament to human endurance. Even at her lowest, she maintained dignity, honor, and purpose. She learned that asking for support did not erase strength, and that facing vulnerability with courage could open doors previously unseen. She had survived hunger, fear, and uncertainty, and in doing so, she discovered a deeper understanding of herself and the world around her. Her journey was no longer solely about survival. It was about growth, awareness, and reclaiming the life she valued so deeply. By the end of this period, Amina had emerged from her darkest moment stronger, wiser, and more resilient. She had faced the reality of her hunger, confronted the tension between pride and need, and learned the importance of honesty and connection. She had discovered that strength was not only measured in endurance but also in the ability to adapt, accept help, and maintain dignity under pressure. She felt prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that she had survived the worst and learned lessons that would guide her through the rest of her journey. After days and nights of hunger, fear, and uncertainty, Amina began to feel a small but powerful shift inside her. The weight of her struggle had not disappeared, but she had learned how to face it. Her pride, once an unyielding barrier, had transformed into quiet strength. She realized that survival did not mean surrendering who she was. It meant finding a way to live while keeping her dignity intact. This insight gave her a renewed sense of purpose. Each day was still a challenge, but now she could see a path forward, one built not only on endurance, but also on careful choices. Rashid, her landlord, had become more than a figure of authority in her life. His initial concern had shifted into something deeper, a willingness to support her without judgment. He had offered small work opportunities in his shop and allowed her extra time to repay the rent. Amina accepted, not as a favor, but as a practical solution. She understood that this was not charity. It was an opportunity to regain stability while maintaining her independence. Each day she went to the shop, she reminded herself that she was in control of how she approached the situation. The work at Rashid's shop was modest but meaningful. She arranged goods carefully, helped customers, and even offered advice to families looking for the best prices. Though her body was still weakened from hunger, her mind stayed sharp, and she discovered that her skills and patience were valuable beyond the classroom. The shop became more than a workplace. It became a place where she could rebuild confidence, reconnect with people, and prove to herself that she could survive without losing her pride. Each small accomplishment, whether arranging a shelf neatly or helping a customer with a smile, reminded her that she still had worth. At the same time, Amina began to rekindle her passion for teaching in small ways. She offered informal tutoring to neighborhood children, quietly organizing lessons in her tiny apartment or under the shade of trees outside. Families trusted her, and the children responded eagerly to her guidance. These sessions became a source of joy, a reminder that she was still a teacher, still a guide, and still capable of making a difference. Each lesson reinforced her sense of purpose, reminding her that even small actions could create meaningful change. Even with progress, challenges remained. Hunger still made some days difficult, and exhaustion threatened to break her resolve. There were moments when she felt discouraged, when the weight of her circumstances pressed heavily on her shoulders, but she learned to face these moments with patience and strategy. She rationed her food carefully, scheduled her work and tutoring efficiently, and focused on one task at a time. She discovered that perseverance was not about pushing endlessly, but about pacing herself, finding balance between effort and rest, pride and practicality. One afternoon, a neighbor approached her with a problem. Their child had fallen behind in school, and they had no means to hire a private tutor. Amina, despite her own challenges, offered to help. She spent hours that day teaching the child, correcting mistakes, explaining concepts, and offering encouragement. By the end of the session, the child's eyes sparkled with understanding, and the parents expressed heartfelt gratitude. Amina felt a warmth in her chest that no amount of food could provide. She realized that helping others, even while struggling herself, was a source of strength and motivation. Rashid noticed the changes in her demeanor and abilities. He saw that Amina was no longer just a tenant struggling to survive. She was a woman regaining her footing, rebuilding confidence, and asserting her independence. He respected her more with each passing day, not as someone indebted to him, but as someone navigating hardship with courage and intelligence. Their relationship became one of mutual respect, a quiet understanding that sometimes strength is shown not in wealth or power, but in dignity, honesty, and determination. Amina also began to reach out in subtle ways, reconnecting with former colleagues and friends. She wrote letters, visited those she trusted, and shared small updates about her life. She did not ask for pity or favors. She shared her journey with quiet honesty. Some friends were surprised by her resilience, others moved by her humility, and some offered support she had never imagined she could accept. Each connection reminded her that life was not meant to be faced alone, and that seeking help, when done with dignity, could create opportunities instead of shame. The turning point became even clearer one evening when Amina sat by her window looking out at the streets below. Children played in the fading light, neighbors chatted, and the town hummed with ordinary life. She reflected on how far she had come, from days of near desperation to a life where she could work, teach, and plan for the future. She realized that her darkest moments had forced her to grow, to adapt, and to recognize her own strength. The pride that once isolated her had transformed into a source of wisdom, guiding her choices and helping her navigate the delicate balance between independence and acceptance. Her strategy for survival became more refined. She scheduled her work at Rashid's shop in the mornings, tutoring in the afternoons, and allowed herself small moments of rest in between. She prepared simple meals carefully, savoring each bite, and used her evenings to plan lessons or reflect on the day. Her life, once dominated by fear and hunger, now had structure, purpose, and quiet satisfaction. Even in the face of ongoing challenges, She felt empowered. She was learning that resilience is built not only in moments of crisis, but in the everyday decisions that shape survival and growth. Amina also discovered the power of reflection. Each night she wrote in her notebook, recording lessons learned, ideas for tutoring, and small victories from the day. This habit became a source of clarity and motivation. By reviewing her experiences, she could identify patterns, anticipate challenges, and prepare for the days ahead. Writing became a bridge between her inner thoughts and practical actions, allowing her to maintain perspective even when exhaustion threatened to cloud her judgment. Her confidence grew as she noticed the subtle changes in how people treated her. Customers at the shop valued her advice. Neighbors respected her guidance, and the children she tutored looked up to her. Amina realized that dignity and perseverance were visible, even when unspoken. Her presence commanded quiet respect, and she felt a renewed sense of worth that went beyond money, food, or circumstance. She was reclaiming herself, one small choice at a time. Amina also began to think about the future more concretely. She considered reopening a small tutoring program formally, perhaps collaborating with the local community center. She thought about writing a book for children, capturing lessons about courage, honesty, and resilience. Her imagination, once clouded by fear and hunger, now began to flourish again. She realized that the turning point was not just about surviving. It was about reclaiming control, purpose, and hope for the life she wanted to build. One afternoon, Rashid noticed her focused energy and determination. He offered a new suggestion, helping manage a small corner of the shop for higher responsibility and a bit more income. Amina hesitated at first, mindful of her limits, but she realized that this was an opportunity to strengthen her independence further. Accepting the task, she began organizing inventory, assisting with customer service, and gradually learning to balance multiple responsibilities. Each success reinforced her sense of capability and self-worth. Through all these efforts, Amina continued to maintain her core values. She treated everyone with respect, never compromised her dignity, and approached each challenge with patience and thoughtfulness. Hunger, once an overwhelming force, was now something she managed, not something that controlled her. Her pride had been refined, teaching her that strength is not stubbornness alone, but the combination of courage, intelligence, and integrity. She had emerged from the darkest period of her life stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever. By the end of this phase, Amina had transformed her life. She had turned survival into opportunity, hunger into motivation, and pride into wisdom. She had learned that asking for help with dignity was not weakness, and that facing challenges honestly could open doors to growth and respect. Her life, once defined by fear and limitation, was now moving toward stability, purpose, and hope. The turning point had arrived, and Amina could finally see a future where she could thrive, teach, and live with pride intact. Her journey was far from over, but the foundation had been rebuilt. Each decision she made, each lesson she taught, each connection she nurtured became part of a new chapter. She was no longer defined by hunger, fear, or isolation. She was defined by courage, perseverance, and dignity, the qualities that had carried her through the darkest nights and into the light of renewed possibility. Amina had walked a long, difficult path. The days of hunger, fear, and uncertainty had shaped her into a woman stronger than she had ever imagined. Each challenge she faced had taught her lessons about resilience, courage, and the quiet strength of dignity. Now, standing at the edge of a new chapter, she could finally see the life she had worked so hard to reclaim. Her body was still healing from weeks of hunger, but her mind was sharper, clearer, and filled with purpose. She realized that survival was not only about meeting basic needs, but also about restoring one's spirit and rebuilding hope. Her mornings began earlier than before, but they were no longer filled with anxiety. Amina woke with intention. She prepared simple, nutritious meals and allowed herself to enjoy them fully, savoring each bite without guilt. She organized her day with care, balancing her work at the shop, tutoring sessions, and personal projects. Every task, no matter how small, reminded her that she was in control. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of freedom. The freedom to live her life not in fear, but with hope, planning, and purpose. The children she tutored had become a source of joy and inspiration. They looked forward to her lessons, eagerly asking questions, sharing stories, and showing their progress. Amina felt proud, not just because she was teaching them, but because she realized that her struggles had made her a better guide. She could empathize with difficulty, understand frustration, and celebrate small victories in ways she could not before. Each smile from her students reminded her that her life had meaning beyond herself. She was giving back, shaping the future one child at a time, and this brought a sense of fulfillment stronger than any material comfort. Amina's work at Rashid's shop had grown as well. She had earned not just income, but respect and trust. Customers noticed her attention to detail, her kindness, and her ability to assist them thoughtfully. Rashid had even suggested she help manage small aspects of the business, and she accepted, learning new skills that gave her confidence. Her days were busy, but she no longer felt burdened by the work. Instead, it became a way to reinforce her independence and to rebuild the life she had almost lost. She felt a quiet pride in knowing that she was no longer at the mercy of circumstance, but creating opportunities through her own effort. Evenings became a time of reflection and planning. Amina often sat by her window, watching the town glow in the soft light of the setting sun. She thought about how far she had come, from days of near desperation, where hunger and fear seemed unending, to a life filled with purpose and hope. She realized that the journey had taught her more than survival. It had taught her about resilience, humility, and the importance of balance. She had learned that asking for help does not weaken a person, and that true strength comes from combining courage with wisdom. Her small notebook, once filled with imaginary lessons, was now a tool for real progress. She jotted down ideas for tutoring programs, community initiatives, and ways to help families in need. She thought about starting a small reading club for children in the neighborhood where they could gather and explore stories together. She considered writing simple guides for children, focusing on courage, kindness, and problem solving. Every plan reflected her growth, not just as a teacher, but as a person who had learned to navigate hardship with dignity. Amina also began reconnecting with people she had lost touch with. Friends and colleagues who had once admired her for her dedication now saw a new dimension of strength. They were moved by her resilience and her ability to rise from hardship without losing her integrity. Some offered support, while others simply listened, validating her experiences. Each connection reminded her that human relationships could be sources of strength, understanding, and inspiration. She realized that life was meant to be shared, not endured alone. One afternoon, Amina walked through the town square, watching children play and neighbors interact. She remembered the days when she had observed life from a distance, her hunger keeping her isolated. Now she felt connected, part of the rhythm of the town once more. She smiled at passers-by, greeted shopkeepers, and exchanged small pleasantries with families. Each interaction, however ordinary, reinforced her sense of belonging and her understanding that dignity and courage are not just internal qualities. They are visible in the way a person carries themselves through life. Her experiences had changed her teaching style as well. She no longer focused solely on academic lessons. Now, she emphasized life skills, empathy, resilience, and problem solving. She shared her own experiences in careful, age-appropriate ways, helping children understand that challenges are part of life and that strength comes from facing them with courage and wisdom. Her lessons became more than a curriculum. They were a guide to living a meaningful, principled life. The children responded eagerly, absorbing the lessons with curiosity and respect. Amina's pride had also transformed. She no longer saw it as a rigid wall separating her from others. Instead, it had become a compass guiding her choices, helping her maintain dignity while also accepting support when necessary. She realized that pride, when combined with humility and intelligence, could be a source of strength, not isolation. She felt empowered by this understanding, knowing that her character had deepened, refined, and strengthened through her struggles. One day, she received a letter from a former student who had moved to a nearby town. The letter expressed gratitude for her guidance years ago and admiration for her resilience. The student wrote about how Amina's lessons had shaped their life, encouraging them to persevere through challenges. Reading the letter, Amina felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She realized that the impact of her life extended beyond the immediate circumstances, that her dedication and perseverance had created ripples that reached far beyond herself. Amina's life became a balance of work, teaching, reflection, and connection. She no longer feared the uncertainty of each day. Instead, she approached each morning with intention, prepared to face challenges while savoring moments of joy. She had learned the importance of planning, patience, and flexibility. She had learned that resilience is built not in moments of ease, but in navigating difficulty with honesty, courage, and dignity. Each day became an opportunity to apply these lessons, to grow further, and to help others along the way. Her relationship with Rashid had also transformed into one of mutual respect. He saw her as more than a tenant or employee. He recognized her intelligence, resourcefulness, and integrity. Their interactions were grounded in understanding and professionalism, a reminder that even difficult circumstances can lead to meaningful connections when honesty and respect guide the way. Amina felt gratitude, not dependency, and this allowed her to maintain pride while accepting assistance. The community around her began to notice the changes as well. Families spoke of her tutoring, her guidance, and her dedication to the children. Some were inspired by her resilience, others moved by her quiet strength. Amina became a symbol of perseverance and dignity, demonstrating that hardship does not define a person, but the response to it does. She understood that her story could serve as a lesson not only for children but also for adults in the town, showing that courage, honesty, and effort can overcome even the most challenging circumstances. Even as she settled into this new rhythm, Amina continued to plan for the future. She thought about expanding her tutoring program, creating opportunities for more children to learn and grow. She considered offering workshops for parents, teaching practical skills and emotional resilience. Her imagination, once stifled by fear and hunger, now flourished. She understood that her experiences had given her unique insights, lessons that could benefit others and create a positive impact on her community. Amina also embraced moments of self-care and reflection. She enjoyed simple pleasures, walking through the town square, drinking tea while watching the sunset, listening to birds sing, and appreciating the warmth of the sun on her face. She recognized that survival was not only about work and responsibility, but also about nurturing the spirit. These moments became sources of strength, helping her maintain balance, clarity, and joy. Through all these experiences, Amina had discovered an essential truth, that worth is not measured by wealth, food, or comfort, but by courage, perseverance, integrity, and the positive impact one has on others. She had faced hunger and despair, yet she emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Her journey had transformed her, deepening her empathy, sharpening her mind, and strengthening her character. She understood that life's challenges were not merely obstacles, but opportunities for growth, reflection, and meaningful contribution. By the end of this chapter of her life, Amina had fully reclaimed her dignity. She had survived hunger, fear, and uncertainty, and she had done so without compromising her values. She had found balance between pride and humility, independence and connection, effort and rest. Her life had shifted from mere survival to meaningful living, filled with purpose, connection, and hope. She felt a sense of calm and satisfaction, knowing that she had overcome adversity with courage and grace. Amina's story was no longer just about hardship. It was about triumph. It was about the quiet strength of a woman who refused to let circumstance define her, who embraced challenges with honesty, who valued dignity and effort above all, and who emerged stronger because of it. Her life became a testament to resilience, courage, and the enduring power of human dignity. She had endured the storm and, in doing so, discovered the depths of her strength, the power of hope, and the enduring value of living with purpose and integrity.